morning, everyone. Draft Eve, orange and blue today. Cecil, Lammey, Andrew, Mason. And, well, Mace, I'll tell you this. I am not going to sleep tonight. I'm ready for it. I'm going to power through. I'm going to try to rest as much as I possibly can. But it is here. Starting tomorrow, the 2023 NFL Draft will be underway. And I, my friend, cannot wait.
Yeah, but I would say this. You say you're not going to sleep tonight, but isn't that like the worst thing you
Yes.
can do
Yes.
when you have to power through after that? I'm going to make a
Yes.
point, even if I have to, take a little sleep aid or something like that. I'm going to make a point of getting plenty of sleep tonight. And then, but the thing is, with the Broncos not picking tomorrow, we're kind of on call, but like, I feel like the anticipation for me is building to Friday rather than tomorrow night.
Right. And just a programming note, I guess maybe not programming, although it should be. I mean, people love watch alongs. You and I are going to watch the draft together tomorrow in studio. And I honestly, we should just turn a camera on each other, not on the screen, but just turn it on each other and just like, yeah, dude, I get to watch the draft with a guy that takes football as seriously as I do. I remember one time, I think it was Tyler. He was like, you take football way too seriously. And I was like, that's one, it's my job. Two, it's my passion. Like I don't know how to not take it seriously because it is fun. I dig it. You dig it. And having those kindred souls and being able to watch the draft together with you, I'm honestly looking very much forward to it.
I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to it as well. Although I have to say this, the watch along thing, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand why people would want to watch other people watching something. Like,
I watch people play video games.
I can't. Yeah, my daughter does that as well. I don't get that at all. Like, I mean, it's weird. Like, I'll watch a sporting event. I'll watch all manner of sporting events, but like, I don't get the whole watch along phenomenon at all, and I don't get watching people play video games at all. Like, it's and it's weird because I thought the watching video games was a generational thing, but you do it. And you're older than I am.
Yeah,
So,
I know. I'm an old guy here, but I also play PUBG every day. So I'll watch other people just trying to pick up tips and tricks and hiding spots. I'm a camper when it
okay.
comes to battle royale games. So people hate me because I just camp for 30 minutes and then try to pluck you at the end. But I think we'll have a video game show later. But right now it's the
Yeah.
NFL draft. So let's get into it. And a situation, DMAC actually brought this up yesterday on the drive because based on where the Broncos are picking, they have 5 picks starting at number 67 in the 3rd round. And DMAC said, so they really can't mess this thing up. And so I told you this yesterday off air, and you almost spit up your Coca-Cola, I think it was. And you're just like,
Yeah.
oh, they could mess it up. So let's talk about draft mistakes, potholes to avoid, situations we don't want to see the Broncos get in on whenever they draft.
Yeah. And for me, the first thing is just because you see somebody falling doesn't mean you should make a bad trade in order to get that player. And I'm fine with a reasonable trade. But let's say they've got somebody that they like and he falls into the early 2nd round. The last thing I want to see is the Broncos getting too fidgety and sacrificing next year's 1st round pick for a 2nd rounder this year. Like, that is, I don't want to see any trades like that. And it's a deal the Broncos have made before. They made it in the '09 draft. That was the Alfonso Smith trade, trading the following year's 2nd rounder for a 1st rounder. And at the time, it was like, well, we got all this extra draft capital because of the Jay Cutler trade. Let's do whatever. And no, it's a terrible idea. It's an impatient idea. So I hope. So for me, like, that's where it begins. Is don't get too crazy in trades. Make reasonable trades, but don't go saying, "Oh, well, we can give you next year's 1 for a 2 this year." Again, it's the type of deal that some teams have made over the years. You go back, Bobby Beathard made a bunch of those deals when he was the GM of Washington back in the '80s. The Broncos can't afford to do that. So for me, that's where it starts. Don't make a bad trade in terms of draft capital.
And we know that Alfonso Smith trade ended up being Earl Thomas.
Yes. It was bad. It was bad
It was
enough when
already
it was
bad.
made. Yeah, and then Earl Thomas is probably going to be a Hall of Famer. I mean, that's like in terms of the value, and in terms of also just being a deal that you shouldn't have even been thinking about making at the time. On every level, it was a horrible trade. It's in the running for the worst trade in Broncos history.
Yeah.
To be fair.
Yeah,
So
for sure. So
don't do
mistakes
it.
in the draft they can make. To me, Mace, it piggybacks off of yours, but it also opens up another avenue in this conversation. Just don't be desperate.
Yeah.
I think that there is a situation. This is going to be like A New Hope, where George Payton is Luke Skywalker and Sean Payton is Han Solo, and they're fighting the TIE fighters. Like, I got one. Like, great kid, don't get cocky. Like, okay, George Payton. Like, hey, there's somebody falling. Like, great, don't get cocky. Like, I think a level of patience. Derek Wolf just talked about it earlier today. Like, if you can be patient, there will be talent, even at edge, even at tight end. Luke Schoonmaker is probably a name to associate with the Denver Broncos. We'll talk more about the Albert O thing in a little bit, but like, okay, tight end and edge, super deep classes. There will be talent that falls to you, legitimately falls to you. An element of patience, know when to strike, I think is maybe the best way to sum it up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm some of the edge rusher talent, especially you get into the early part of the third round. I'm not completely sold on in terms of the value of it because edge rusher being premium position, it gets picked over pretty quickly. But there will be tight ends of value there at pick 67, and maybe a first round value tight end slipping into the back half of the second round. The range from which the Broncos could make a reasonable trade to move up and get that player. A trade that is something like pick 67 and a fourth round pick next year, something along those lines. You could make a deal like that in order to get a player if they start falling into that 50 to 55 range.
Yeah, another draft mistake that they could make, and I don't believe they will, Mace, but when D-Mac said that, like, they can't mess this up. I was like,
I beg to differ.
Yeah, I think any sort of character red flags that have been flagged by the team, and every team does their own investigation on these players. Very rarely does it happen where a guy doesn't come up again. It does sometimes. I'll bring up Noah Fant, for example, and I'll tell you off air who it was, but I had a very, very trusted person tell me, like, hey, there's some stuff with Noah Fant. And I was like, well, tell me what it is. And he would never tell me. And there was some stuff from high school. Someone drew a gun on him, I believe was the exact police report, but nothing on Noah himself. And Noah was always good to me. He was always good to you, never gotten in any trouble, stuff like that. So there are, teams that get a certain idea about a player, and maybe that's a wrong idea about a player. But I think, ignoring your reports because of the 40 time or whatever, like, don't get too excited if you flag someone for characters or injuries. Like, you just need to stick with what you've done and know that that'll be the best decision you can make.
Right. And injuries in particular, that's one where you can take chances, but it has to be at the right point. I mean, I'll go give you an example. Back in 2017, now, in retrospect, should the Broncos have taken George Kittle? Yes. But you know what? Jake Butt was somebody who arguably could have been in the first round, maybe even early in the second round, and the Broncos are getting him at the top of round 5. That was great value just because it didn't work out, that he continued having knee problems. That doesn't mean it wasn't a shot the Broncos should have taken. The risk-reward ratio was pretty fair there. So that's the thing. I'm not opposed to rolling the dice on injury risk players. It's just got to be at the right juncture of the draft. And unless you're talking about somebody who would have been a number 1 overall pick or close to it, I don't think 67, 68 is the area where I'm taking that risk on a player that's got a high injury rate or a high injury risk going forward.
Well, and I would say on the flip side of that, it was the Jake Butt thing, like there with O.J. Howard and Evan Ingram, like he'd have been right there. He'd have been right there. He never been hurt. Jake Butt was right there. First round conversation, no question. When the Broncos get him in the 5th, it's tremendous value. You take that sort of chance. I would say on the flip side, another mistake you could make is don't don't be stuck on the bargain bin. Okay. As someone, when I go shopping, I always go to the clearance rack first. Like, what can I find? Maybe somebody left over, whatever. Like, okay. And then get your pieces wherever. And, obviously I love my shoes, but like, okay, don't be stuck on the clearance rack. Don't be stuck in, we only can get bargains. We got a bargain bin, and let's just keep moving back. Like, again, like, know when to strike, but and be patient. These are all good things, Mace, but also at the same time, don't just primarily shop at the dollar store.
Yeah, if you are a fan of The Simpsons, you might remember the episode where Marge Simpson goes to the outlet mall and finds a Chanel dress in a sea of, horrible activewear, right?
That was the pink one, and she like cut it up, right, in a different outfits.
Because it was
It was the country club, right?
Went to the country club, and and one of the other members was kind of mocking her for wearing the same dress, and so she's like, "Oh, I better, change it up." And then eventually she does too many alterations to it, and it breaks down, and she goes back, hoping that she can find another dress like that, but it doesn't exist, right? I mean, you're gonna find the needle in the haystack once, but you're probably not gonna find two needles in the haystack. So that would actually be something else. Don't roll the dice on the outlier. And that's another thing to kind of consider in this draft here. When the Broncos are picking at 67, 68, that is in the range where it is increasingly rare to find a day one starter at that point, right? Now, it doesn't mean that you can't pick a player that you expect to develop into a starter down the line. But I would caution everybody in Broncos country to look at what they're doing draft-wise and say, and not necessarily expect to find an immediate starter. And sometimes you may get better value by picking that player who's going to take a year to develop as well. And that's another reason why players fall to the third round, is that they may have the talent and they may have the traits, but it could take a little more time. First, second round, you're talking about guys that you want to start right away, unless you're talking about the quarterback position. You get to round 3, I think everyone maybe needs to slow the roll on the expectations a bit.
Yeah, and it is Orange Blue today, presented by Champ Honda. Roger says there's a Simpson episode that Homer wanted the Cowboys and got the Broncos. I remember that one too.
Yeah, and you know what happened in the next 2 full seasons after that episode? The Broncos won the Super Bowl.
There you go. All right.
Maybe that's what they needed. They needed Homer Simpson to own the team.
Can the Simpsons predict the future? Have you ever bought into that conspiracy theory? Like, though they've hit on quite a lot.
They have. I mean, I think it's funny to think about, but they had. Yeah, I think. I mean, I don't know if there's a time traveler or what. I just think that they're. I think part of it also is sort of the absurdity of culture. Is some of the things they look at and they predict. They're like, well, if things continue on a current course, what is the most extreme thing, right? For example, there's an episode where famously they refer to a President Trump.
Yeah, riding down the escalator.
Yeah, and Lisa Simpson. Well, no, in this episode, it's not riding on the escalator. It's just, this particular episode, Lisa Simpson's the president. She says we inherited quite a budget crisis from President Trump, and Milhouse is the Secretary of the Treasury and says they're broke. Anyway, so they were asked, like, how did you guys predict President Trump? And I think one of the writers said something like, if things keep going in a certain direction, what is the last step before all hell breaks loose, basically? And I'm like, oh, President Trump. Okay. there you go. Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny to think about. It's remarkable how many things they've gotten right. Like, for example, Disney and Fox being part of the same company, at least for a lot of things, not like Fox News Channel, but like The Simpsons is now part of Disney, right? I mean, people watch The Simpsons on Disney Plus. I mean, and so, and there's at one point, I think they show Fox to be a subsidiary of Disney or something like that. So, Yeah, they've nailed quite a bit. I mean, it's funny to think about like that. Oh, they got access to a time machine. I just think you've got a lot of bright people working on the show that are able to see beyond the horizon and think, okay, if things really get crazy, what does it look like? And some of those really crazy things actually end up happening.
Skate to where the puck's going, not where it's at. It
Hey,
orange and blue today.
I didn't
Yeah,
know you were a hockey
reference.
guy.
I know. The rare, and that exhausts all of my hockey knowledge. It's orange and blue today, presented by Sean Ponda. Look at Mace shake his head like, yeah, guy's a moron, except for football.
Oh, I didn't say that. I didn't say
I
that.
I kid. A draft mistake, final one before the Albert O thing. And Stokely brought this up. Actually gave me chills when B. Stokes suggested it earlier today. Does George Payton have to suck up to Sean Payton at all? It got brought up in the Aiden O'Connell conversation, and Stokely said this is like a perfect gift for Sean Payton to be like, if you're George Payton, be like, look, Sean, look what I got you. I got you Aiden O'Connell, and some people say he could be the best quarterback in this draft. And I told Stoke, I said, dude, we could have done 3 hours on this topic. Does George Payton need to suck up to Sean Payton, and would that actually be a draft mistake?
Part of the process is finding players who fit what the coaches are trying to do, right? Schematically and even in terms of style. So I think there's something to that. If it were quarterback, if it were someone like Aiden O'Connell, I think that would sort of be the most obvious and boldest manifestation of it. But if you've got a functional team, in a functional organization, I should say, aren't you getting the coaches some players in which they're interested? Because you're saying, okay, you're not solely relying on the coaches, but you're finding players who have the traits that the coaches are looking for, right? A good organization, the coaches and the personnel department are working together to get the right people to fit the right way. Like it's a draft. The draft should be a shared moment, shared vision. And I can tell you, in the past, there have been years where the Broncos, between the coaches and the personnel side, weren't necessarily aligned, and right. That happened during and toward the end of the Shanahan era, for example. And there were some draft misfires, I think, that were a result of not having things aligned and going with the opinion of people who really hadn't been doing the work that the scouts had. I think that the best way to do it is coaches have their input, but it's more like, okay, these are the types of players we want. And then the scouts will say, okay, this is why this player X is good. This is why player Y isn't. And if you're doing it right, then it's not throwing a bone. It's, okay, this is the type of player you wanted. We went and got him just like that. And so it would be the quarterback thing is interesting just because of the primacy of the position and how close the quarterback is going to work with Sean Payton. But if it's a functional process for the Broncos, I don't think it's throwing anybody a bone. I think it's just good process.
George Payton, and Jules says it here in the chat room. Is that a big Kahuna burger? Jules says, if Sean Makes determines the picks, George can't be fired if they don't work out.
It doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Yeah, George is on the hot seat no matter what. And here's why I think George needs some Mickey Loomis to his game, and I don't think he does have it. Okay, and I think it's more the situation than him. And let me explain. In 2017, the famous draft we always talk about, Sean Payton did not like Alvin Kamara. He thought he was soft. Mickey Loomis made that call. Alvin Kamara is a perennial Pro Bowler. Okay, if that same situation arises and whatever running back it is, let's say it's Tyjae Spears, and Sean Payton doesn't like him for whatever reason, he probably does. You should. Does George Payton make that call? Does he have the cachet to make that call? I don't think he does, Mace.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, this is the Sean Payton show. Now, that being said, how much has George Payton earned Sean Payton's trust at this point? I mean, I'll say this. The two of them, when they had that press conference last week, looked to be very much on the same page. And when you have Sean Payton talking about how impressed he is with the analytic department of the Broncos, I think there has been some winning over of Sean Payton from various corners of of the personnel, analytics, football operations at Broncos headquarters. And because of that, I don't I I'm not sure that you might not have a situation where it turns out they pick somebody who maybe Sean Payton isn't all on board for, and the general manager is. But that being said, I think those knockdown dragouts have already been resolved going into the process, and I don't think it's going to be something like it was where Sean Payton isn't convinced, George Payton is, and they're making the call. I think the picks they're going to have are going to be the ones that cross over on the Venn diagram for both of them.
It is Orange and Blue today. It is presented by Sean Ponda, Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason. And earlier today, I had some breaking Broncos rumblings. Don't want to call it a rumor. Don't want to call it a report. But in doing my mock draft, my annual mock draft, where I just check in with people I know around the teams, not media people, but I just check in with teams, except New England, because they don't talk to anybody. And I was like, hey, what do you think? Am I close? Is this ballpark? I learned today that the Miami Dolphins have interest in Albert Okwuegbunam, that they might be in the market to trade for Albert Okwuegbunam, depending on the tight end they can get in the 2023 NFL Draft. I was not told which tight end they want. I can kind of guess. But Mace, Albert O, maybe drawing some interest. Now, does Sean Payton like Albert O? Do they even trade Albert O? Like, okay. And again, this is contingent on what Miami does in the draft with their tight end position. But it sounds like if things don't go the way they want, they might pick up the phone again and contact George Payton about Albert Okwuegbunam.
And the interesting thing there is the Broncos' interest is probably incumbent upon what they do in the draft at the tight end position as well. Mm-hmm. Because if they do not emerge from day 2 with a tight end, if they go in other directions at 67, 68, or whatever picks they end up having, I don't know that they're making that deal. Now, if they get somebody, then I think they're open for business. And so for this trade to happen, the Dolphins have to not get a tight end, and the Broncos have to get a tight end. I think that's the thing to look at here. And I think this is true for a great many positions, many teams going into this process. It's why you see trades on day 2 and day 3 of the draft, and even teams that start their free agent to final phase of it, final wave, I should say, of free agency. Why they start that process sometimes during the draft if they don't get what they're looking for early, and then they go back into the market and end up filling the holes that way. You want to see what you can get from the draft first and then react to that. And that's why, I don't think you can close the door on the Broncos having a trade that involves a wide receiver just because of how fluid these things end up being. It makes some sense, but it's got to have the right combination of what the Broncos did and what the Dolphins did or didn't do.
Right, and I'll reiterate again, I don't know which tight end the Dolphins are targeting in the draft, but if I'm guessing, it might be the same guy the Broncos would like. So it's like, okay, can Denver get the tight end? Can Miami not get the tight end? And then can they get Albert Okwuegbunam? Okay, that would be interesting. And as Jose in the chat room's fired up here, Alberto's not going to get you, more than a day 3 pick, but he might get you more than Cortland Sutton would have got you in a trade.
Yeah, potentially a little rarer skill set, and the perception that there's some untapped upside there. Now, it's interesting to me that Miami would be interested in him because I don't know that he necessarily fits all that Mike McDaniel wants from a tight end.
I asked that about Mike Gesicki because I said, well, Gesicki can't block, and Alberto's basically Mike Gesicki, and I was told that is maybe not as important to Mike McDaniel as someone like me thinks. So I did ask that question because that's the first thing I went back with. I was like, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. Alberto can't block.
Yeah, and Gesicki found himself losing playing time as a result of that because
Yeah.
again, what they do, not what they say. What they were doing was de-emphasizing Gesicki because he's a non-factor as a blocker. So, and that's why I think you're right when you say that the Broncos and Dolphins are probably interested in some of the tight ends, Schoonmaker, Musgrave, guys who can do everything. That's that's the deck from which those teams would like to draw if they get a tight end in this draft.
Orange and Blue today, presented by Sean Honda, Cecil, Lammey, Andrew Mason. As we wrap up today's show, tie a bow is what I like to say, Mace. Any draft rumors that you're hearing? For me, I'll toss a couple out quickly. Anthony Richardson to Seattle seems to be building momentum. The Patriots moving up for Will Levis and trading away Mac Jones, perhaps to Houston, seems to be gaining some momentum. The Bears' interest in a tight end seems to be gaining momentum. So the first round conversation is very interesting, and I think we can sum it up like this, Mace. We know what's going to happen at 1, most likely Bryce Young. 2 and beyond, I have no idea. None.
Yeah, and I think interesting thing, if we're going to kind of read between the lines here, Pete Carroll was telling ESPN's Jeff Darlington today that there were a couple of guys at quarterback they'd be fired up about. And by the way, he told Jeff Darlington that while wearing a Seattle Kraken sweater, which, of course, I mean, you talk about twisting the knife on Denver and Russell Wilson and the Broncos a little bit, right? I mean, and if they do take a quarterback with that 5th overall pick that they got from the Broncos, as if there weren't enough layers to the fallout from the Russell Wilson trade, then it's possible that if they find their quarterback of the future and that guy and they pick Richardson and he's their quarterback for 10 or 15 years, then oh my gosh, yeah, that may well become the worst pick in the worst trade in Broncos history. I would say in terms of rumors, I am fascinated to see what happens with Hendon Hooker. And I think this draft starts at number 2. And I think Houston has the potential to shake it up if they don't go quarterback. And I know Peter King wrote about this notion a few days ago. If they waited and did take Hendon Hooker later on, if they saw him as a better fit for what they wanted to do. To me, even though everyone's wondering what Carolina is going to do number 1, we know they're going quarterback. To me, the draft starts at 2.
Yeah, the draft starts at 2, and are they in the market for a Mac Jones? Like, do they decide to do that and get move back in the first round and then get next year's first rounder from New England? One thing's very clear this offseason. I know it's not whatever the Patriots colors are and today. Silver and blue?
I mean, the silver is kind of weird because, the Patriots, you'd think just red, white, and blue, right? But then they threw the silver in 1993. So I think you'd have to say like red, blue, and silver today.
Although red, white, and blue today does have a certain ring to it, right?
Oh, it'd be terrific.
It'd be beautiful.
Yeah, but
but one thing's clear: Belichick does not like Mac Jones at all.
Yes,
and Mac Jones fit 2 places. Ironically, I'm going to talk about Sean Payton here. He fit with New Orleans and he fit with New England. Outside of that, Mac Jones, in my opinion, Mace, isn't real good. He's a dirty player. I actually don't like him. But we may see him on the move. And honestly, if you went with Bailey Zappi and a rookie, Bailey Zappi and Will Levis, if you're the New England Patriots.
Okay. Wow.
I don't like Will Levis. I don't have a first round.
I was going to say, I don't like either of them, if we're being honest with you. I mean, right. Zappi's a perfectly fine mid-round type of quarterback who I think benefited from an incredibly friendly system, at Western Kentucky, in particular. So, man, okay. I mean, if you're a Patriots fan, you trust in Bill Belichick at this point. But man, I would look at a quarterback room of Zappi and Levis, and I'd kind of be underwhelmed if I were a Patriot fan.
Gag me with the spoon.
Yeah.
As we go a little 80s on today's program. But Mace, we finally made it, brother. We're here. And tomorrow
We
we'll be
made
watching
it.
the draft together.
Ah.
So,
Oh, we're there. Hallelujah. The waiting is going to end. And then on Friday, we'll start to unwrap the presents and see what's under the Broncos tree. Or maybe they shock everybody and they pick tomorrow night. Although I don't think they will, because to get there, they're probably trading Jerry Jeudy or Justin Simmons. And I don't think they're going to do that.
okay. He is Andrew Mason. You follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. This is Orange Blue Today, presented by Champ Honda. I am at Cecil Lammey. We appreciate you all for watching. Make sure to do those YouTube things like comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid, and help us grow our YouTube channel. You like the show? Share the show. Tell other Broncos fans about it. We certainly appreciate everyone for doing that, watching the video to the end. I know it's annoying, but these things help with the ever-changing YouTube algorithm. He's Mace. I'm Cease. OBT is BFD. Until next time, be safe, be kind, know that you are appreciated. Stay tuned, and I would like you to please stay frosty,